Stephen, thank you. No, that was wonderfully thought-provoking. One of the features of the last couple of years or so has been the street protests, and they've been exemplified particularly by Occupy. So I'm very pleased to say that we've got George Barney here, who was involved in Occupy London. George.
Thank you for the introduction. Just to clarify, Ron was involved in Occupy, I'm still involved in Occupy. We only had the first stage here. And it is going to be more difficult in some ways from now on, because as the powers that be usually do, they find ways of compromising effective means of protesting that people come up with. So it's becoming very difficult actually to establish camps. We had a wonderful event yesterday, which I'll talk about a little bit, where we ended up having a sort of Reclaim the Street style party outside the Shell Centre, and the police basically said to us, you can do what you like, but if we see any tents, we'll get rid of you. And that's sort of the problem we're facing. The reason it's a problem is that when we do one-off events, they very easily just become yet another one-off event. As I imagine most people in this room are aware, there are lots of good things going on. The real problem is how to somehow kind of amplify them and coordinate them effectively. So I'm going to say a few things based on some very random notes I've jotted down, and then just respond briefly to some of the things that some of the other people on the panel have said. I think we need to be very, very clear about the link between the necessary and the possible. And I think for very understandable reasons we're seduced into focusing on what seems possible a lot of the time. And I think the effect of that is that the majority of people who don't spend a lot of time engaging with these things, that perhaps don't understand the way power and propaganda works, it means there are just thousands of different voices coming from the environmental movement. So, you have various different kind of hues of NGOs that have developed very rational strategies in terms of reaching out to certain sections of society, and they come up with messages that are not badly intentioned. There's no intent to deceive or lie, but I think what we've lost in the kind of strategization and commercialization of civil society in the last 30 years is truth with a capital T. And having studied philosophy, I'm very tempted to go into the problems with relativism, but I promise I won't do that. I will absolutely resist that. But suffice it to say that I think probably everybody sitting in this room knows that, yes, of course, everyone has their own opinion, and anything that anyone says is to some extent just an expression of where they're coming from, but there is truth with a capital T, and I think we need to fight for that very, very much. And when it comes to this relationship between the necessary and the possible, what is true is that we need a massive, massive shift in pretty much everything that's going on in the world. And for really understandable reasons, a lot of us working for NGOs or whatever it is end up not really telling people that most of the time. We tell them that there are important things that need to change and we should focus on this meeting or whatever it is, but I think we lose that truth. The reason so much for change needs to happen is we have a politics of domination, and it's called competition, which makes it sound very reasonable. But that politics of domination essentially means that the very powerful, in the name of competition, will basically flatten the others on the playing field. And quite reasonably, those in the poor world, when they see the rich world doing absolutely nothing except endorsing nice-sounding principles in terms of helping the environment, of course they turn around and say, it basically acts as if there's no point in really trying to do anything, and that they should, all they can do really is play this game where they get what they can for themselves in this ever-increasing race to the bottom. And I think it's very, very important to try and share that idea. Competition equals domination, and it's gone for 400 years with all sorts of pretty much unimaginable brutality for most of us who lived in fairly comfortable circumstances. What capitalism has meant in terms of dispossession and destruction for hundreds of years is really extraordinary. We see an Operation Green Hunt in India at the moment, for anyone who's not aware. There's around about 100,000 troops trying to clear the last major remaining area of forest in India. It's a big strip on the middle, and basically anybody who resists being removed from their ancestral lands is by definition a Maoist, and therefore can be treated in unimaginably violent ways. But that dispossession has always gone along with our system, and we need to be very realistic about this. And this is not about being sort of anti-capitalist in some sort of knee-jerk way. It's just about recognising that, that old quote, those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them, and it's staggering the extent to which we seem to just be fetishistically repeating the mistakes of history. I mean, even in terms of the economy, anyone would have thought this was in 1931 and we had to win the basics of the economic argument about how to respond to crises, but the powers that be have the power more than ever to convey the most incredibly irrational and deceptive positions to the public, and the public seems to buy them. Just a word on the danger of the term sustainability. Of course we should have a sustainable world, and I'm sort of attacked and distorted by the powers that be. It will, just because it has, doesn't mean we should run away from it, because then we're always going to be running away from our concepts, because they always do that. But I think the danger of sustainability is it covers over the fact that what we're doing right now is incredibly destructive. Sustainability gives the impression that there's something that we need to deal with. Even if we were quite urgent about it, sometime in the near future we need to sort of make things sustainable. What we're doing right now is destroying the very basis of life itself. And I know, by the way, this is going to sound really doom and gloom for a few minutes, but I'm hopefully going to come to an incredibly positive conclusion. So bear with me. But I think in terms of having any chance of really changing this argument, getting people to understand the systematic, holistic problem, what we need to understand in the rich world is that we are the bad guys. We are the bad guys, and of course it's not totally black and white, and all, especially in a sort of complex world of all sorts of sullied negotiations, things are never going to be black and white. But basically, the rich countries, as they have been for the last 400 years, are the bad guys. And yes, there may have been certain, moderations in terms of the way we dominate and oppress much of the rest of the world. But basically, that system goes on, and most of the people in the world, on some level, however consciously or not, understand that. And unless we bring that story to people in the rich world who don't understand that, and there's no reason why they should, because they never told it. I never was. Took till I was about 20 to even begin to open my eyes to the fact that this was even a plausible narrative. Any of us in this room who does understand this really needs to try and share that as much as possible, as often as possible. The key thing that I'm dancing around here is information politics. There's roughly, I think, the current figure is about $2 trillion a year spent on public relations and advertising, $2,000 billion to make sure that people's minds are warped in a certain way, that people's understanding of the world is shaped in such a way as makes sure they acquiesce to the realities of power as it is at the moment. And when we talk about the problems that we have, I think what we tend to focus on, for all sorts of reasons that, again, I won't go into the philosophy of, but what we tend to focus on is the problems out there. I think a really productive focus really needs to be getting people to understand the link between the problems out there that we understand so well and the politicians say that they're going to do something about, and they have these lovely principles about. What is the link between those two things and the complete failure to do anything about them? And I think so much of that comes down to information politics. And sure, people like the Guardian and the Independent might write more kind of brave, truthful stuff about what's going on in the environment generally, but do they really take the ball by the horns and tackle the corporate power that's destroying the world? Of course they don't, because they're paid for 90% by those very corporate forces. There's the other person is George Monbiot, who has this sort of niche that means he can write an article saying this paid, the adverts that surround my article are destroying the world, but there are very few others who can do it. And most people never make it to page 15 or whatever it is where his articles are. So the realities of information politics directly undermine the efforts of progressives. I think one of the significant things to sort of connect with the Occupy movement is that at every turn, when we're talking about failure to deal with environmental problems, what we're really talking about is a massive structural inequality between issues economic and issues environmental or developmental. You get Chris Hume making nice speeches, but the reality is that pretty much if the Treasury doesn't want what the Environment Ministry wants, then it doesn't happen. And again, these are things that are sort of cliches that we know, but so we don't tend to repeat them. And I think we do that at our peril, because the system of power works very well because it does repeat over and over again what they want people to hear. And, you know, their research and our intuition, I'm sure, confirms the fact that most people, if they're not particularly engaged with the minutiae of these issues, if they don't have a frame of reference, they tend to just internalise the stories they hear most. I mean, that's how our neurophysiology works. So we need to, I think, remember to repeat the things that we know that are most significant, and not just get lost in the detail of the day. On the global level, you know, the reality of World Trade Organization, voluntary agreements, bilateral trade agreements, you know, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is a terrifying thing that has just sort of come into the news, and the alternative news, I guess, in the last week. There's a thing called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Has anyone heard of that, the TPP? So it's basically that it's the latest, even kind of darker version of NAFTA, but it stands for, I think it's currently got 10 countries signed up to it, but it's basically a process which would completely bypass government. And, you know, the $350 million has already been paid out by the US government under NAFTA, so that under that agreement, any local government or national government, for that matter, that puts in, say, a ban on toxics, has to pay any company that incurs extra costs through having to deal with those regulations. $350 million. And the TPP is vastly, vastly worse. NAFTA is bad enough, but it was at least open to the public and to civil society and to the relevant Senate oversight committees. The TPP has not been at all. It's been 2.5 years in the making, and somebody in the US government said recently, well, we haven't released this one to the public, because last time with NAFTA, when we did, we couldn't push through what we wanted. So this is what we're talking about, these sort of parallel processes of locking in corporate governance, and we have similar problems with, you know, the Lisbon Treaty, etc. But I think we need to be very, very realistic about the link between the visions we have of improving things environmentally and how quickly and how effectively the powers that be are legally locking in with, you know, no fanfare as far as possible, completely behind the scenes, trajectories which are already going at incredibly high speed in the wrong direction. And I think that idea speaks very importantly to one of the rational ideas, and those very rational ideas that we tend to have, namely that anything is better than nothing, and that we need to be hopeful because otherwise we're going to slit our wrists. I have to respectfully disagree with that position from two of my fellow panellists. I think hopeless hope is one of the most dangerous things in the world, where we look at a situation and we realise that actually it's really, really bad. I don't think at that point it's useful to turn around and go, well, unless we kind of pretend it's good, then nothing's going to come of where we are. I think there's a much more positive position, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I think there is a much more positive solution and liberating solution to really taking stock of the reality of where we are in the world at the moment. I mean, in terms of climate, we have incredibly short time frames in terms of most of the planetary boundaries that we're, you know, careering beyond, or many of them. We're talking about irreversibility that is being locked in increasingly every year, that we fail to get things really moving in the right direction. So I would say that things that look as if they're moving us in the right direction, that make us tend to say, oh, well, it's better than nothing, are actually worse than nothing in a way. Because at least if there's nothing, people are going, there's nothing, what are we going to do about it? And the huge danger of a well-intentioned but largely co-opted civil society is that people go, oh, well, you know, there are experts, there's a meter on it, you know, people are trying. I think we need to be very realistic about the speed, as I said, the speed at which things are going in the wrong direction, and what we might be able to do about it. Okay, it was a little more negative, but we will get to it. So yeah, this is about the pragmatic and very understandable sacrifice of truth that we make at every stage, and I think keeping, you know, the feminist revolution, let's remember to speak from the heart rather than get dragged into the tendency to speak in the head, and I think if we don't keep head and heart together, we don't have a prayer, because the other side, if we try and play their game, there's no way we're going to win it, because they're vastly more powerful. They control the relations of definition, to use a phrase that one sociologist came up with. We must let go of the advantages that we do have. Understandable it may seem at every point to go in that sort of pragmatic direction. To put a very clunky phrase together, which I think I probably don't have time to go into that much, but I think what what we need is a programmatic, counter-hegemonic, holistic, compassionate revolution.
You got it?
And I'll go through this. Programmatic is what we've lost. The Achilles heel of pluralism is that, again, for very understandable reasons, we focus on the particular group that we're part of and the particular sort of local benefits that we're trying to achieve with that group. And what we've lost in the last 30, 40 years, I'm not saying that the post-war period was perfect, I'm not being nostalgic, but the reality is there were programmatic political possibilities. And for anyone who's interested in this, by the way, CRESC, C-R-E-S-C, is a really, really interesting team of academics from a variety of universities that have been talking about the economic crisis in very useful terms. But they're a group that talks about this failure of programmatic politics. So the powers that be have vastly less credibility than they did 5 years ago, but they are vastly more powerful than before the crisis, because we are cursed at the moment by our plurality. I'm not saying we get rid of that plurality, but we need to find unity within it. I think that's what the Occupy movement is sort of grasping out towards in some way. The counter-hegemonic bit is, and this I think is very relevant in terms of where many of my fellow panellists are coming from. The realities of living a life working for a certain organisation mean that need for a counter-hegemonic focus tends to get sidestepped at every turn in favour of focusing on the particular things that we're discussing. But the effect of that is to give the impression that the people we're negotiating with and engaging with are ingenuous. We talk about these nice principles. Why are they not being put into practice? Because they were never likely to be put into practice unless there was a massive change in the political culture in terms of understanding how things have changed in the past. End of slavery, rights of women, decent working conditions, free healthcare. Pretty much anything came about not because the right politicians said they were going to do the right thing, but because a whole bunch of people got beyond the divide and rule capacity of power to unite and actually lever the political system into doing the right thing. And I think we need to be very, very realistic that need to take on a system of power that works into every single element of our lives is utterly crucial. The package that neoliberalism has brought has meant that any one framework that we try and focus on is certainly not going to work, because these examples I give of the TPP, etc., and NAFTA, these are just a couple of many ways that we are utterly undermined at the moment unless we take on the system of power as a whole. The holistic thing, obviously, I think that's already implicit in what I've said. Unless we recognise that this is about understanding the inalienable holism of the relationships of environment, social justice, economy, etc., there's no way that we're going to win this. And the compassionate thing, just a word on that, and this may sound like a sort of superficial addition, but I think what is special about the power that we have at the moment is that it's power from within. It's not power over anymore. 100 years ago, people were sort of in their place in society, and people would come along and say, look, you shouldn't have to occupy that place. Those people are top, they shouldn't have the power, we should take them on, we have this, we the workers have the leverage, etc. That has completely changed, and we know that. We've had non-conformity repackaged as 1,000 different commercial products sold back to us in all sorts of ways. And the reality is that this power from within now has turned us into these individualised consumers. And even when we're trying to work against consumerism, we are still sort of individualised. It's very, very difficult to get people to think of themselves primarily as part of a collective. I've done street campaigning for many years for various organisations, and that is the real difficulty. Even when you get people saying, oh, this is terrible, something should be done, people's understanding themselves is as one among 7 billion, not a part of a whole that can move in certain powerful ways, as it has time and time again to make things better in the past. So I think that recognition that we are turned into these afraid, acquisitive beings means that compassionate element is really, really important. Actually working against how that system divides and rules is about trying to embody a loving compassion. I'm really running out of time now, and damn it.
George, you've run out of time. Thank you.
Okay. So
thank you very much.
So the very positive solution that I'm going to focus on is that there is a win-win, I think, for where we are at the moment. We can get out of this immediate economic crisis by having a sort of last redemptive spurt of growth as we shift to the green economy. As we shift to a remotely sane world, and that process would be a re-democratisation of political and economic power, a move to subsidiarity, a move to a kind of sane, compassionate world that there's no reason why we can't have. I think we already, with the number of people that are already committed to this in principle, if they were working together, not divided and ruled, we could win it already. Critical masses are 3 to 7% usually. Maybe this is a very big one, maybe it's 11%. But the more we can work together, the more chance we have.